everyone. I hope you're having a great evening. My name is Mina, and I'm a senior here at HPA, and today I'm going to be talking about book bans and book challenges, a little bit about what they are, why they happen, and when they have happened. But first, I want to tell you a little bit more about me and why I think this is such an interesting topic and why I think this is such an important topic. I was raised in a family where reading was greatly encouraged, and some of my earliest memories involve my parents reading to me or gifting me books. When I was old enough, I would spend long hours curled up in between bookshelves in what my public library endearingly calls Narnia, but others might call the children's section. I would often leave the library with armfuls of my favorite books, and my handy helper, otherwise known as my father, would also leave with bags of backup books for the moment that I inevitably read through all of the ones that I was able to carry. Although eventually those bags were consolidated when my father imposed a rule that relocated me from my beloved Narnia into the teens fiction section, the quantity never quite changed because I quickly figured out how to order books online. All of this is to say that I grew up very attached to books and to reading. So fast forward a couple of years, and I'm in the car with my mother, and the topic of book bans comes up for the first time in my life, and I was baffled. She told me about a time when she was younger, and an upperclassman mentioned that their school had been using the very same book for their grade every single year for as long as they could remember. So, in preparation for that year, my mother decided to read the book. Fast forward, she gets to that year, no mention of the book in sight. And she's a little bit concerned, she's a little bit worried. She's like, I already read this book, where is it? So she goes to the teacher and she asks, and the teacher says, that book just got banned, so we can't use it in our schooling system anymore. And I heard this, and I was shocked. I had no idea that this was a thing, that books could be restricted in such a manner. And I didn't really understand the logistics of it. To be fair, I was very young, but it just didn't click in my head. And so years later, in fact, currently this year, when I was researching for my capstone project, I decided for my capstone project that I would write my own book. And so I was scrolling through some articles, and a title caught my eye. And of course, this title was about book bans. And so a couple of hours later, and a dozen articles under my belt, I was hooked on the topic again. Now, because I'd already decided on what my capstone project was going to be, I decided that it would be the perfect talk instead. And so here I am with all of you today. Next slide, please. So let's just talk a little bit about what they are exactly. A book ban, according to Middle Tennessee State University, is when a private individual, a government official, or an organization removes a book from a library, school reading list, or bookstore shelf because they object to the content, idea, or themes within that piece of literature. Now, the stage before this is what's called a book challenge, which is when, according to the American Library Association, an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objection of a person or group is made. Next slide, please. And common reasons for these challenges and eventual bans to occur include, but are not limited to, explicit sexuality, so this could be a sex scene, or it could just even be sexual education within a book. Obscenity, LGBTQ+ content, drugs and alcohol, violence, and religious themes. And I was doing my research, and I was scrolling through this long list of book titles of books that had been challenged or had been banned. And honestly, a lot of the times I was shocked. I saw so many books that I grew up reading and loving. Amongst a couple of them that really shocked me was A Wrinkle in Time and Fahrenheit 451, which I read in school my sophomore year. Next slide, please. And then I got further into it, and I started looking at historical examples farther in the past. In 1933, in Nazi Germany, works of John Doe's, Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Helen Keller, amongst many others, were burned and essentially banned. In 1973, in North Dakota, 32 copies of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five and 60 copies of James Dickey's Deliverance were also ordered to be burned because they had references to homosexuality within them, as well as uses of profanity. In 1983, in Alabama, there was a call for the rejection of The Diary of Anne Frank because it was a real downer and it had references to sexuality. Next slide, please. In more recent years, in 2016, Russia, 53 books, including textbooks about logic, French surrealism, and criminology, were also burned. And in 2019, two of my favorite examples, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale were demanded by large groups of people to be removed from shelves. Harry Potter because it included actual curses and spells and showed depictions of witches. And The Handmaid's Tale because it had sexual overtones and vulgarity within it. Next slide, please. Now, why do I think this is important besides the fact that we've established I love books? It's a form of censorship. And while the First Amendment does protect your freedom of speech, it doesn't necessarily protect written word. This also limits learning and encourages people to conform to the ideals of those with the power to put these bans in place in the first place. It's a way for our education to be put into a box. And it's important to be aware of that and make an active choice in your life whether or not you're going to educate yourself further beyond what you have been allowed to learn. And I truly do believe that. So with all of that information, I would like to encourage you all to maybe go home and read a couple of books, maybe even a couple of articles online about a topic that interests you, and to just keep on trying to educate yourself further and protect books that might have otherwise been banned or challenged. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great night.